everybody. So, I'm Ann Isaacs.
Joel Isaacs.
And we're the people who teach Bodynamic training in North America, Canada. We're the guys. And what we teach is a particular way of teaching bodynamics that we call healing developmental disruptions. So it's different. If you've done the foundation training, it's different. If you've heard about the foundation training, it's different. And we'll talk about what we do and do some experiential work tonight, with each other, so you get a sense of it. And maybe you want to talk a little about that. How did you want to start?
Okay, so for better and for worse, bodynamics is based on a lot of empirical research. And the good part is that it's based on a lot of empirical research. So it's not just an idea and a practice built around an idea. The difficult part was the experimental research gave a lot of information, and the information could be overwhelming. And in fact, it was taught in a way, I think, that was overwhelming for many people. So that many people were very impressed with it, but could not put it into use because there was just too much information.
So this is this is the information. It's an encyclopedia.
Right.
Of muscles, psychological function, developmental stages, ego functions. I mean, it's a lot of information.
Right.
So what we've done
is to, instead of teaching the information, we teach people how to use it. And to do that, we boiled it down to what is essential for you to really be able to do effective and efficient sessions with your clients from this training. And to do that, we've changed the structure of the training, and we've changed, the initial manual was about 3 times this size. Now we've got it down to 1/3. And we've even gone further, and you don't have to look now, or you can look, and some of the sheets that you were handed, you'll see how we've condensed it into a model of how you use the work, and 1-page summary of the information you need to know in the moment to work with a given developmental stage. So we have 7 pages for the 7 developmental stages, and that's really, after you do the training and have an experience, that's all you need to refer to in a sense when you're working with clients. You can study more and learn more, but you will have the essential information to use this work in a powerful and practical way.
So the bodydynamic model is a developmental model. And what they integrate is cognitive development, psychological development, and somatic development. What's unique about how they integrate somatic development is they look at the actual developmental movements that children are making at these different developmental times, and they see the psychological correspondence to the physiological movement. So that is like the key to what's unique about their theory. So they really integrate that.
And the developmental movements are using certain muscles, and we work them with the muscles. So you can sometimes have a client do a developmental movement, but you can often have them just use a particular muscle that is involved there, and that will evoke a lot of the history of the issue that you're trying to work with them.
So they also have looked at the developmental themes and developmental stages. So each developmental, there's 7 developmental stages. They start with existence, which is what happens in the womb. They go through what are more traditional developmental stages, what Freud called moral, we call need. The next stage we would call autonomy. It's about really being able to start to separate and be able to sense your own impulses and follow your own impulses. The third stage is about coming out with your power. We call it will. It's about really following intention and being able to really assert yourself, and that's when you're really separate and you can start to say things to your parents like, I think you're stupid, I don't like you, you know, and really be, you know, come up against them, you know, like that. But you also can make plans and sort of have this intention to go and follow what you want to do and follow your ideas, not just impulses. And the next stage is the love sexuality stage, which has to do with the integration of both your heart feelings and your sensual and sexual feelings. But the two stages that follow that are, as far as I know, there might be other people that do this, but as far as I know, what's unique about this model is that they also look at what they call the opinion stage, which is when kids start school and they start to center in their mind and they start to think and they start to recognize that there are different ways things are done in the world, so it's involved with values and norms and forming opinions about that. So there's that stage of development, and the last stage of development is one that happens from about age 8 to 12, and that's what they call solidarity, and it's how we function in groups. So these are two stages that are really quite relevant to adults, how we think and how we function in groups, that most systems don't really understand and certainly don't know specifically how to work with. The other thing that's unique about Bodynamics is they really have a model of looking at 3 different outcomes for every developmental stage. One is you can be resourced,
which means you've learned the abilities that needed to be learned to have a successful voyage through that developmental stage.
And that means that as an adult, you have these abilities easily available to you. They're resources for you. They help you with however you're functioning. Another possibility is what they call the hyper-responsive or rigid way of being, which is more White's concept of armor. You know, too tense, too rigid, too stuck in a pattern, a way of doing things, and not having flexibility. But the thing that they really work very well with, and that I think is essential to what's unique about our work, is working with the undeveloped, the thing you never learned. And it shows up in the muscle as a muscle with not a lot of resiliency, not a lot of ability to be flexible. There's not a lot of energy there because it's a skill you never learned. And you don't even know you didn't learn it a lot of times. You just know that there's something that other people can do, and I don't understand, but it's not something that I have a clue about. And that's more the hyper-responsive.
An example of the muscle. Okay, so to make this more concrete, what Anne is saying, we probably all have either seen or had the experience of trying to feed a child in a high chair, and when they've had enough, they kind of push away. And this is the tricep muscle is used to say, set a limit. No, I don't want any more. So what happens? Well, if the parent is responsive and say, oh, you don't want any more, want some more of this? No, you don't want that? We're finished with dinner, okay? And the child learns that they can set a limit. They can say no. And they can push away.
And this is pre-language.
Pre-language.
Their body is expressing it.
Yeah. However, if the parent, for even good reasons, thinks, no, you need to eat more, you need to be healthy, and forces it, the child may give up saying no. So there's a resignation or a giving up. So the child, again, either never learns that they can or resigns themselves and gives up, and there's a low elasticity in the muscle. And in later life, they can't set limits and can get into real difficulties when they're in a relationship, because if you can't set limits, you get overwhelmed. So that's one of the positions, the early position, giving up. And the later position, maybe they were allowed to say no for a while, but then was overridden. So they have a lot of energy in the muscle they're holding back, and that will lead to more rigid reactions in situations of, say, setting limits. No, you can't do that. No, I don't want that. As an adult, they would be more rigid in their way of setting limits, which leads to problems too.
If they, sorry, what preceded that?
How did they get into that? I mean, they were able to do it for a while, but then it was no longer accepted, maybe for some other reasons.
And that's why they got strong.
That's why they have energy in it and have to hold it back.
So that when it's expressed as an adult, it's done in a more rigid way. Because it comes, the no comes with a lot of energy that might not be related to this very thing, but it's like, no, that kind of no.
Sounds like that would be a beneficial set of skills for parents to learn.
Well, actually, I think this whole developmental model is a great thing for parents.
Yeah.
And we had an experience, we have a daughter, and she was just almost about 1 when we started our Bodynamic training. It lasted a few years, so she went through the developmental stages as the group was learning them.
She was the model.
That was fun. But what I want to say then is, what I just demonstrated, either the resignation or the rigidity, is what we're calling now developmental disruptions. In the development of learning how to have a new ability, there was something that was either not taught, not accepted, or suppressed, and it leads to behavior which, for the child, is we call it a protective behavior. In other words, if your mother doesn't really want you to set a limit, you get a better relationship with her if you don't set limits. Okay? So that's the protective behavior. You learn to keep the relationship up or keep your sense of self in different situations. But as an adult, it's limited. Okay, and that's what we're working with. And these are, as opposed to traumatic experiences, which are mostly mapped into the autonomic nervous system, these kinds of developmental disruptions are mapped into the voluntary nervous system and into the muscles. So and into the mind, but they're accessible through the muscles.
So another principle of the Bodynamic model is that they call it mutual connection. It's like we learn who we are in relationship. And so at each developmental time, there are themes that we're trying to work out. And to maintain the relationship and maintain ourselves, there's some negotiation as to how we're going to do this. And the negotiation is in how much we're supported in learning what the skill is and what our response is if we don't get the support we need. So we learn who we are in relationship. If the relationship can really accept whatever is emerging, then we learn whatever that skill is. So for instance, around need structure, which is right after you're born until about a year and a half, according to Erickson's model, it's about trust and mistrust in the world. What we call it is around getting your needs met. And how well do you manage that? How well do your parents and your caretakers teach you that you can learn how to get your needs regulated? So these are the rhythmic needs, the everyday needs of sleep-wake, of eating satiation, of contact, of aloneness, of not knowing how to comfort yourself and having someone come in and help you be comforted. That's all about need regulation. It's really the basic themes of being human. And when you feel like you have an attuned caretaker, you develop a secure attachment because you can rely on that person, and that person is attuned enough. We know that it's not attuned all the time, but attuned enough. In the training that I studied the AAI of the adult attachment interview with Mary Maid and Eric Hess, and some of their research showed that in the non-institutional population, people who are not in prison, and people who are not in mental institutions, secure attachment happens about 70% of the time. So it's good enough. It doesn't have to be perfect, it's good enough. Developmental disruptions are in that category. You can have, a lot of secure attachments. This was really interesting to me when I studied with them. Have flavors of maybe avoidant or have flavors of ambivalent, but it's still securely attached. When you get into a truly avoidant or truly ambivalent attachment state of mind, or a disorganized state of mind, there's much more than just a developmental disruption. There's a loss of ability to learn, or having learned what you needed to learn. So that's integrated into our work too, and we work a lot when we're teaching you this model of development of how you relate to a person or an infant at that stage. Of course, with need structure, you slow down a little bit. There's a softer voice. There's a slower way of coming in and holding or touching, or it's not like the way you would with the will structure. Kid just coming up and saying, "I want to do this," and you go, "Oh yeah, you want to do this." It's a different way of meeting that person or that child. And the same is true when you're doing therapy. When someone's working on something that's coming from need structure, you talk to them in a different way than you do someone who's in will structure. You're going to say different kinds of things with a different tone of voice, with a different level of charge and excitement. So that's part of rehealing disruption in attachment and in contact. And so at the same time that you're building this relationship this way around the developmental themes, you're also, of course, working the psychological process. But then when we bring in the body and we start to use the muscles that correspond to what was lost or what wasn't learned or what's being held back, there's this way that the body can really come online. And again and again, what happens when people see this work or get this work is that they're sort of amazed, and I still am too, and I've been doing this for 25 years, but I'm sort of amazed how we can oh, that's what you're working on, okay, so try, contract this muscle, and how does that feel, and what happens, and people will go, oh, and all of a sudden they'll reorganize their sense of themselves internally, and then they're able to do the behavior that was prohibited or not supported enough, and be able to come out with it in their body, and they know it in their body now, and new connections are made neurologically, psychologically, and somatically with this integration.
When that happens, the old protective behavior is no longer needed or felt as needed, and so it's much easier to move forward. And that's how we're understanding psychotherapy now, in the sense you don't solve problems so much, they resolve. You now have an ability you didn't have, and you go ahead and do this, It's just like a new skill, You learn how to write, you write. You know what I mean? You don't know how, you don't.
You made me think of something when you said that, about how we do things. Oh yes, so when people come in to work with us, we really work with what's happening in their life today. We work in the here and now. So when somebody says they want to work, we'll say, so what do you want to work on? And we'll say, can you give us an example from your life today, how that's happening? So we make an agreement, we call it a contract, we make an agreement, this is what we're going to work on. So we know sort of where we're going. We know what they want to change. We know how it comes up in their life today. And as they're talking about it, and as they're talking about how it comes up in their life today, what you start to see is their body starts to go into how it's happening right now. And how it's happening, like if I use an example of what happened in our group today. So I think someone started talking about an issue they wanted to work on, and they started, they were looking sort of just how they normally look, and when they started to talk about it, they sort of went. just in talking about it. So we could see, this person is starting to collapse, they're starting to lose their energy, they don't, they're out of their feet, they're certainly out of their center, and they're sort of, a little lost with what's going on. And we could recognize it as will structure. So when we said, well, first of all, you need to get a little more centered so you can support yourself knowing how you feel.
Using a muscle from the will structure.
And then you might need a little support from your back, and you need to ground this, and you really need to have all of this, to be able to face this decision and how you need to respond to this person who's talking to you the way they're talking to you. So these are the kinds of things that you'll learn in the training, is what's happening in the body, what's the developmental theme that they're working on, and how we can resolve that right now. So, any questions so far? We threw a lot at you.
Yeah.
So let me give you some examples.
I have one example.
Okay, all right.
This was startling. It turned out well, I'll tell you in advance. A woman had heard about us, came to town, didn't live near us at all, to do two 2-hour sessions. Sometimes we work together. So, okay, 2-2-hour sessions. What would you like to work on? She said, I'd like to work on the fact that my mother and my father incested me. 2 sessions, okay? Well, we were able to do something very significant because we did, as Anne was saying, say, okay, we're not going to go through the whole history. If something comes up, we'll work with it, but how is this affecting you in your life today? And she was able to, with our help, go through how it's affecting her. We worked on those issues, and she left feeling that she had much more control of her life today.
And she could say no. She could set some limits about something today. And so it's like when you learn that you can do it about something today, and that your body can do it, and that you can do it, and you can see yourself doing it, that's the beginning of developing a resource. Now, we haven't resolved all the terrible things that happened when she was young, but she had an experience of she could do this today, she could use her body in this way, nothing bad happened. And so when she goes to work with the trauma pieces, her body has some resource that it didn't have before that, which is the ability to set limits, and knowing that her body can say stop. As a matter of fact, one of the first things I do when people come and work with me is not just for trauma, just so that they know that they're in control of the session, is I ask them to just say stop to me. I said, we're going to talk. At some point, you're just going to say stop, and I'm going to stop talking. And you don't have to tell me you're going to do it. You just do it. And that lets people know that they can say stop to me. And it's in a relatively low charge, non-threatening situation. The other thing that I'll have them do is, at some point when we're talking, I want you just to get up and walk out the door and go into the lobby when you want to. Don't tell me it's going to happen, just do it. So they know they can walk away whenever they want to. But they have that skill in their body, and they have that skill in their body with me. But that creates a kind of safety that is really important to some people. And yes?
I didn't mean to interrupt you.
You didn't interrupt.
Okay. I have a question about the example that you just gave. So what I'm understanding is that you guys had 2-2-hour sessions and you came into a place of resource for her today and were able to work with how it shows up in her life
Yes.
now.
She couldn't say no to her boss who wanted her to work more hours,
Right.
and to her daughter who wanted her to babysit her child more hours.
Right. So that allowed her to come into that place of will in today's present moment.
Yes.
My question is, if you had more sessions with her, say you had 5 or 6 sessions booked with her, would you have gone back to the original trauma and worked with it back then to help bridge that?
It would really depend on her.
Right.
How much she's integrating it.
Right,
how much charge she can handle.
right,
What we try and do is build resources before we go into the first things
sure.
and approach it a little bit at a time. Can you keep the resource? If not, okay, we've gone too far, let's back up a little bit.
Right,
So that would depend on her.
right.
The idea is really, if your life is the way you want it, you do not necessarily have to go into the wisdom.
Yeah.
I guess my question around that is, so, you know, that there is still that child in there that didn't get something.
Yes.
So do you at some point go back and help that whatever
Yes.
child get their need met that,
Yes,
that
of
didn't happen
course.
back then, and that then also helps them in their
Yes.
present day life
Both.
today? Yeah.
Both.
Okay.
But we start with how it's starting in your life today.
Got it. Okay.
Because the idea is that you go from the lowest charge
Right.
situation
Sure.
and develop the resource so your body knows, and then you go a little bit into another one that's a higher charge, and then you get, by the time, and when you work that way, by the time you get to the really awful things, your body has already made this pattern
Right.
of resiliency, of competency that they didn't have when they started. And I'd say the other thing that in this model that we work in is that we don't believe the body always has the wisdom to figure it out itself. You know, that there's some things that if you just didn't learn, you need a little bit more support. And that's really a sign of the hypo-responsive. You know, it's like if it's just, and it's not just dissociation, it can be, I never learned it. I have no idea, you know, that how to do this.
Can you give specific examples of that?
Yeah, but what I said before about setting a limit, you know, if you were discouraged too soon, too early, or too vigorously, you don't know that you can say no, essentially. You know, or you kind of, if you start to say it, you kind of lose the sense of it. So it's not there, it's not going to come up spontaneously. It has to be taught. You teach a person in this situation how to push, what they might be saying, till they can feel that and start to get a little more sensitive themselves. Before that, it's not there.
Another example of, what were you asking, Jonathan? An example of what?
Just examples in general.
Of things people don't know?
Yeah, like early autonomy or early need, what that looks like.
Okay, so early need, that's the need structure we were talking about, is some people are so undeveloped in sensing their own needs, they don't know. What's so funny?
Yes, there are some people like that.
When Selena laughs, I've been with Selena for a few years now, we did SC together. When she laughs, it's usually because there's some agreement.
It's like, oh God.
That's a big, oh yeah.
All those people.
Okay.
Work so hard. So how are you feeling? What? You're like, wow, really? How can you not know any of that? It happens. It's shocking.
So with need structure, people can not have a sense of when they're hungry, or not have a sense of when they're full, or not know when they're tired.
It's younger.
I'm aware. Not know when they need contact, not know when they need no contact. You know, it's like those needs, if you weren't supported to be attuned to that in yourself, you haven't learned it. So it's so, you know, so you might start with like touch. Does someone like to be touched? So you can say, well, how do you like to be touched? So if someone are working with it, so, well, if I'm gonna, I wouldn't do this, but. So what do you think? So he might say, oh, you know, I have some tension in my arm. So I said, okay, well, let's work with what feels okay. So I'm not going to give him what I think he wants right away. I might do such, you know, like, just, how does that feel?
Are you touching me?
Well, you can see I'm touching you, but so Do you like it like that?
Firmer.
Okay, so do you like it like that? So I might do it like much more, so that they can start to get in tune with what touch actually feels good. And then they have to direct it to, I'd like it softer, I'd like it harder. That's just with touch. Some people really don't have a sense of that. They need to develop it. If they're trying to figure out if they're full, a lot of people don't know what full feels like. They go way past full until they're like, oh God, I ate so much. So what does full feel like? How do you know it? How do you know when you've had enough? Not when your head says you've had enough, but what are the sensations that actually go with, I'm full? And so that's something you can train somebody to start to be aware of. Did you have a question?
Well, I was just thinking of like an example of somebody who wouldn't know when to stop eating. I'm guessing it maybe or could be somebody from like an impoverished environment, somebody who grew up in an environment where they didn't
Where you
have
just,
enough.
if it's food there, you eat as much as you
Yeah.
can when you have it.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you don't
yeah.
know when the next time.
Yeah, I
And
was just thinking of all the examples. When you're
Yeah.
giving examples, I was just thinking of a scenario in the environment that would take place in something.
right,
Yeah.
right. So you go past full because you don't know when the next meal is coming.
Yeah.
Right.
Is it possible to have, I'm just curious, to have an awareness of some of those needs,
Yes.
but not others?
Yes, because
Okay.
it depends on what your caretakers
Right.
could teach you. And I want to say a lot of this is not like mean, nasty caretaking.
No,
If your parents didn't learn it, they can't teach it.
exactly.
Or if they're not comfortable with the feelings that come up
Yeah.
around it, they'll suppress you in some way.
Right. Interesting.
Right. So, some people love infants, but when they start to become a little separate, they don't like that, They're too much trouble, I
Other
like
people
to.
don't like it till they can talk.
Right. So, again, like what happens at those developmental times that support you to learn something or doesn't support you to learn something.
This one, I was at the Y exercising one day, and a very pregnant woman was talking with another woman, and the pregnant woman said, I can't wait to get this thing out of me so I can go to a spa and give it to my husband for 2 weeks. This is not what the infant needs.
But a lot of pregnant ladies say that when they're about to burst. They're like, enough, okay, yeah. You'd be shocked at how many people get to that point.
So again, there's the over rigid way of learning to do things, and there's the I have no idea how to do this. I have no idea how to be in touch with that part of myself. So I want to say something about. So we talked about developmental disruptions, and we talked about developmental ruptures, and what is a developmental dysregulation. I also want to talk about what developmental movements look like and how they correspond to what we're teaching. So if we talk about grounding, grounding as a concept. So with need structure, because they're not walking yet, the ground is what is, when they're lying on their backs, can they feel supported by the earth? The ground is their support, and they start to learn about their body by lying on the ground. So the erectors have a lot to do with grounding them.
These are the spinal muscles.
The long muscles in the spine. And the infant will learn the developmental movements. No one's saying do this. The impulse is there and they do it. They're lying on their belly and they use their spine to pick their head up and then pick their back up and look around. And look around and engage with the world. And then they get tired because remember their heads are really big. And it's not easy to pick up a head. If you had a head that's 3 times the size of your head now, it's like, so it's a lot of work. So they pick up their head, and then they look around, and they look around, and then, if they get contact, they might look around a little bit more, and then they get tired and they put their head down. But they're using the erectors of their spine and their neck to lift themselves up, to engage with the world. So what happens if when they come up, no one's there, and no one engages with them. And, okay, well, there's not much joy in that. So I come back down, and so the rectors don't develop that sense of aliveness of I want to come up, I'm going to look around, I'm going to see somebody, and the rectors, the more they come up, they start to use their hands, and they come up, then they, that little sort of dolphin stance they have, they're up like this, and they're like looking around. If that's not there, those muscles don't develop. So how does this translate into what that looks like in an adult? So an adult, if you're erect, if you have that healthy need structure, your spine holds you up. The erectors hold you up like this. But if you weren't met, and you weren't greeted, and you weren't supported to have your needs, it sort of goes like this. There's a loss of tone. And you can see this in people, and they have like the C curve here and a C curve here, and there's this hollow, I used to have one of these, by the way, like a hole right here in my sternum. There was like this cave in where, when I was born, my mother was dealing with the fact that my brother had very severe polio. So, my needs weren't always tended to the way I think she would have liked to, but she was overwhelmed. What the developmental movement corresponds to how people stand and move today, and what they look like. It's in their posture. If we think about grasp, how do babies grasp? So the first grasp is the cross-palmar grasp. When you put your finger in a baby's hand and they just go like that, and they hold on. So that's grasp. But when they're nursing, there's something they do also, which is this. They have this little pinky feeling. They do. They're holding their breast and they're going like this, or and it's like this really deep taking in. Actually, they're doing it with their little toes too. So it's like that's really deep taking in. And when you're working with someone in need structure, and it's with need structure, it would be like this sieve. You give them something and it just runs out the other side. They don't know how to hold on to it. They don't know how they don't recognize they don't know how to hold on to it. So you say, okay, can you remember when someone gave you this? And let's just do this as you're remembering that they're really there with you, and they really wanted you to have this, and you can see I'm slowing down and how I'm talking, the way you would talk to someone like that. And let's just take it in. See what it feels like if you do this and you take it in and you really hold it inside. So I'm going to shift again to the next grasp, which is autonomy, which is when they go out and they're exploring the world, and there's this, they're just excited about everything. But they do things like this. Look! Yeah! And then, but it's like, it's this curiosity, but it's like about this little thing, and it's like I hope this isn't dead skin or something. but
So curious.
Yeah, they don't care. They don't have a name for everything, so they're like picking these things up. If you pick things up like this, your orientation to the world is really like the autonomy stage of development. You're curious about it like this. It's very different than taking it in like this.
I was at an airport recently where the piece of carpet was crumbling, and there was a couple that had twins. They were about 2 years old, and the daughters were picking up the pieces, giving it. The father was really good. Oh, nice, thank you.
That's wonderful.
For about half an hour, I went over and complimented the parents how well they were doing.
So then the next grasp gives you a window. To me, all the muscles are like a hologram. So I'm just going to work with grasp because it's easy to see. But the next grasp is with will structure. So they start to be able to do something like this. They can use the grab things, they grab things, go boom, boom, boom. Oh yeah, grab this and go, I dare, like this kind of thing. Or they'll do things like they'll grasp like this. here I come, I'm gonna move this over here. You're in my way. But it's that kind of grasp. And that's like the power of exploring the world through motion, through, I can do these things. It's not through impulse, it's through motion. So you get the idea of the developmental stage just by using one muscle. So we could go on, but we're not going to, yes.
Can I just ask you to repeat what you said? I think you said the different developmental stages are like a hologram?
No, I said the muscles.
The muscle.
Each muscle is like a hologram to the whole developmental stage.
Got it.
So like you can get something essential about it by just this. You can, if we changed it to walk. So how do kids walk? So the first walk is impulse driven. Yeah? It's like, okay, I see that shiny thing in her hand, and so, it's impulse. It's not, I didn't make a plan, I'm going to go over and take that bottle. It's like impulse driven with will structure. So, and that's like, I'm just sort of falling forward, I'm using my hands for balance.
That was autonomy.
Yeah, that was autonomy. Again, that was this. But the walk is like that. For will structure, the walk is, and you can actually, you know if you live downstairs from someone with a will structure, because they walk sort of like this. It's like this intention, but there's not a lot of articulation in the feet, but there is determination. But you know someone upstairs from you who walks like this.
Down below, we have two teenagers.
So.
One is quite autonomous.
And then with love sexuality, the next stage, the walk changes to something like this. They start to push off with their little toes, and the pelvis starts to move differently. You get the side to side, the swish, and you also get the pelvis going front to back. That's a very different walk, and that gives you an idea, something about this stage too. When I walk like this, you get a very different feeling about me than when I'm walking like this. And about where I might be resourced or stuck. Any questions? Again, we're throwing a lot at you. And as you can tell, we're excited about it.
Yeah, it's very rich, but I keep going here and here. It's kind of dig it all in.
My question was that a bit earlier about not doing trauma. You mentioned independence and not doing trauma is disruption. You mentioned the trauma is in the nervous system, but I thought the trauma is also in the body also, so I'm kind of confused.
Well, the autonomic nervous system is in the body.
Right.
But it's
In the muscles too, isn't there trauma being in the muscles?
not particularly, unless it were affected a particular muscle. But it's not so much in the muscles.
So like ongoing sexual abuse and incest,
It does. I would say it affects the muscles, but not in the same way that developmental disruptions do. There's a retreat, but it's like, let me go back. We do something called a body map. And when we look at a body map, we test 4 degrees of hyper and 4 degrees of hypotonicity. Mm-hmm. And trauma is usually in the 3s and 4s. There's a real strong not availability of the muscles. And again, that's unusual. That's not as common as the developmental disruption, where there's 1 or 2, sometimes 3 degrees of disruption.
How do you test for that?
How do you test? You test the muscle. You go in and you go and touch it.
Measuring the elasticity.
You're measuring the elasticity. So you see how much what's the responsiveness when you come back. So yes, it's in the muscles, but in terms of the energy of it, it's really in the autonomic nervous system. There's this, how can I say it? It's like the energy of trauma is more like electricity. It's like overwhelming. Mm-hmm. The energy of developmental disruptions is more like a wave. It can be contained or not.
So the training you're doing, the one coming up next year, is not trauma.
No.
It's disruption. Do
Yes.
you have other ones for trauma later
Yes.
on, or?
So you have to be better to learn the early stuff first, rather than going into working with trauma. You have to ground
That's a matter of opinion.
it. Oh, okay.
I don't, see, the way we look at it is that if you don't resolve one, you don't resolve the other. So you can work with all the trauma you want, but if you don't work with the developmental stages and really like heal and learn the skills that weren't learned, the trauma won't be resolved because you haven't built the resources.
That's what I was trying to say.
Yeah. And if you just build the resources, you know, and you have the muscles online and everything, but you don't work with the trauma, they can get hit by something where they, you know, go, then the dissociation can happen. But the dissociation is really different than, like, it's, you know, going out as opposed to, like, really being in your body and muscular. It feels different in the muscles. So would you agree with what I just said?
Yes, yes, I would. I mean, I say it more facetiously. Developmental disruptions 25, 30 years ago was called psychotherapy. In the last 20 years or so, trauma has become much more accentuated, and in some areas it seems to be what people think is all there is, you know, but it's not all there is.
And so we like to really work with and teach people how to work with the body around development. Because that's pretty much happens to everybody.
Yeah, someone with a lot of, or someone who has very little resources in their body is much more susceptible to shock trauma.
Right.
Whereas someone who has a lot of resources in their body won't be as susceptible to shock trauma. So that really impacts your ability to handle trauma and how to deal with trauma.
Because I work with a lot of people with early trauma, you know, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah. Well, we do too. But so there's a line between what's developmental disruption and what's trauma. And they often overlap, but they are really different. Okay. Any other questions?
I'm still stuck on that because I'm feeling confused now by this conversation, just this conversation. Because in my mind, early developmental trauma is, it seems like we're talking semantics. I don't know. Like,
I don't think so. I don't
I
think
mean,
we are.
early developmental trauma in my mind is a disruption.
Well, yeah,
the
I mean, everything's a
developmental
disruption, but we're talking non-traumatic developmental disruptions.
These are small things that happen repeatedly.
Well, it's what, I mean, I guess then it's what do you define as trauma? Like, what's your
Exactly.
definition of what trauma
And
is?
in the recent years, trauma has become more and more the definition of anything that happened.
Right.
And we just.
Well, that's overwhelming to the system, right?
Yes.
Anything that the system can't integrate or that.
Right.
You see, but these things are integrated. They've happened as small and repetitive, and I learned to say, not set limits. Is that traumatic? Not particularly.
It can be.
I mean, if someone says, don't do that. Yeah,
Or if, you know, if there's sexual abuse, you're not allowed to set a limit, you know, and that's massive.
Right, yeah.
That's massive. That's trauma. What we're talking about is not massive. It's just day to day to day to day. You're not being met. You're not being seen. You're not being attuned to. You're not getting what you need. You're not being supported to have power. You know,
Yeah, I guess I would define that as trauma.
we don't.
So,
See, it's an age difference. We're older.
All right.
Seriously, and I'm not being pejorative.
Uh-huh.
I mean, you know, more and more has become called trauma. And I think it's because certain influences in the field have pushed in that direction. But this is, the things we're talking about are not mapped into the autonomic nervous system. And that's what
Yeah,
we're-
that's the part I'm having a bit of a challenge with.
it's not there, it's in the voluntary nervous system, which isn't talked about anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, so if a parent gives a limit and that causes the child to go into a fight-flight response,
No, didn't happen, no.
It's not from a limit.
It's not, these are
Okay,
smaller
well,
things.
okay, if the parent does something that causes the child to go into a sympathetic response, then how do you say that that's not in the,
But the things we're talking about don't produce a response in the autonomic nervous
and
system.
how do you know that?
We map it.
We can trap it in the body, and you can probably measure it in the autonomic nervous
So
system.
let me give you an example of
Okay,
something.
okay.
So, a woman in one of our trainings has done a lot of trauma work on her sexual abuse. She still couldn't be with her husband. She wanted to work on that with us. So we work with helping her resource some of the muscles that have to do with love sexuality stage of development. She'd never done that before. She felt she had control. She felt she could start to sense her own sense of sensuality without being overwhelmed. She felt she could use her body as a resource by tightening certain muscles. And she was able to go home, and this is a very sophisticated woman. She was able to go home and have a different kind of relationship, sexual relationship with her husband that night. And she had worked a lot with that part of it, but she hadn't worked with resourcing the muscles that could support being in the here and now. Does that answer your question at all?
I'm still sitting with it.
Okay, so maybe you need to see it.
Yeah, I think, in EMDR we call it big T traumas and little T's. The big T's are the big ones.
Right.
Little T's are the everyday bad experiences.
Yes, and we don't call that trauma.
Right, but is that what you're talking about, the everyday bad experiences, developmental?
Yeah.
That's the one you're talking
Yeah.
about, not
Yeah.
the big.
Yeah, and they happen to everybody.
Yeah.
And I think it's a mistake to call that a trauma. I think it's a disruption, but a trauma is much more severe. You know, it challenges your whole sense of being. It challenges your... Trauma for us hits several different character structures at the same time. It hits existence, do I have a right to be? It hits needs, no one is here helping me with my need. It hits autonomy, I can't do anything, you know, I'm on my own. And it hits will structure, I have no power. That's like, that's not, we're trying to work something normal, you know, every day out, or normal developmental themes out. It's like, right to all of them, and it's overwhelming. And it's too much to integrate. Huh?
I was thinking someone who said to abuse that this is a young child and this feels normal when this happens all the time. It's not a massive shock in the same way you're talking about. It's kind of it doesn't matter. This is
Okay, yes.
There we go.
So that's how we make the distinction. And we also work with trauma. And we work with it differently than how we're teaching this.
Can you
Okay.
say more about the use of voluntary nervous? You were distinguishing something about voluntary?
Voluntary muscle system. The somatic system is the voluntary muscles.
Yeah.
The involuntary is stuff that happens whether you want it to or not.
Reactive.
Yeah. It's like, you know, it's
Stuff
like
that's on
the-
autopilot. That's not-
Yes, it's
that's
the
not-
instinctual, you know, that voluntary is I can choose this, I can choose that, I can, you know, like, whatever. I can choose it. Now, I might not know how to, I might not have access to it, but I can get there.
And bringing consciousness to it as an adult at a time earlier you wouldn't have had the awareness to choose.
Yes, yes. I would also say a lot of people who've trained in SE we've trained a lot of SE practitioners and teachers, and they come to us because they learn something different. And they Raja recommends people coming to her. Raja Selpan is one of the trainers. Recommends people to come to us because there's something we can teach that they don't know.
Yeah, it's not about fight, flight, or freeze. It's about things that happen slowly. It's like, do I have this ability, this consciousness ability to do something, or is it a rigidity in the body that's very different than fight, flight, or freeze?
Yes.
It's not. The developmental disruptions don't trigger that response. They
It's
don't
not an
trigger that.
instinctual response.
Yeah, they don't trigger an instinctual autonomic response. They trigger a different type of response that has to do with the conscious ability to utilize psychological functions as manifested through the body. So it's a very different paradigm, and one that's not taught almost at all.
More holistic.
Yes. Well, developmental.
Yeah. So anyhow, so we wanted to give you an experience of working with one of the structures and one of the developmental movements. So we've mentioned a few times autonomy. And autonomy is this stage where you're exploring the world. It's actually when object constancy develops. It's when the children, first when they're separated from their caretakers, there can be this anxiety that comes up. And so they want to know if they can restore stability with the relationship. And when they learn that, there's a term called object constancy, which is, even though I don't see you, I know you still exist. And one of the ways they do that is they play the game peekaboo. So it's, it's like, where's Joel? Where's Joel? Where's Joel? There he is! So that game of peekaboo, they can control, or you can play it with them, and they can, they know they haven't disappeared, but they find you, and then you can find them again. That's the game of object constancy, and they really play it a lot. So, so that's one of the things they're doing to really figure out that idea. They don't know they're doing it, but that's the game that they're doing. So another thing they do is they somatically.
Who's they?
The children, the
Okay.
infants. But somatically, I talked about grasp like this. Until this stage of development, they can't let go. So here they can finally let go. Up to that point, when they're holding on to something, they have to bump into something to let it go, because they can't use the extensors to let go. So this is when they sit in the high chair and go, again, and again, and again, and again, because they're learning they can let go. If they're not allowed to do that, don't do that, you're making a mess, whatever. They don't really feel supported in letting go. But when they can let go, they can start to do something really different. Also, they can start to do this with their wrist. They can turn it this way, and they can turn it this way. Supinate, pronate. Supinate, pronate. Up to that time when they're eating, they're going something like this. They hope they get it to the mouth, it's like, they can't pronate and supinate. So what they do is they'll find something that's special to them, and they'll come. Or just this one instead, I'm gonna get it. So they'll have this really special thing, and then they'll look, and look. And then they might, you put your hand like this, and they go, look what I have. And they'll give it to you, because they can let it go. They can really give for the first time. They can let go and let me take it. And then you look at that and you go, whatever you do with it, and then they'll get like, oh, am I going to, I want it back. And they get it back. So they learn to give and receive in a different way. So the experiment I want you to do is to find something you have with you today that has some special meaning to you. And see, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, just right. So find a partner, and you're going to do something like this. You're going to I'll pretend I'm Joel's partner. Well, Joel is my partner. I'm not going to pretend. Just pretend.
Just put them out.
So
I'm just using this.
okay, so I'm going to take this thing, and I'm going to tell my partner why this is important to me. So I'm going to say, well, someone gave me this stone, someone who knew a lot about how much I like Chatoyan, see, which is stones that change with the light, and had it made for me and gave it to me as a present when I didn't know it was coming. And it's very special to me for that reason.
Who was that guy?
It was you! And so I tell him about it, and then I take it, and he's just going to have his hand like this, and I'm going to pronate my hand, and I'm going to tell him about it, and then I'm going to let it go. That's how I'm going to give it. I'm going to let it go. And then he's going to take it, and he's going to look at it and do whatever he does with it. And I'm going to hope he's nice to it, or that he's going to really appreciate it, or something. And he might not, but, you know. And then at some point when he's done with it, at some point,
I'm anxious on your behalf.
he's going to drop it, pronate, and drop it into my hand. And I'm going to take it back, see what it's like to have him have it, and then to have me have it again. And I'm just going to experience what it's like to have someone really listen to what's important to me, really look at what's important to me. I'm going to give it to them, and then to get them to give it back to me. So that's the experiment we're going to do right now.
With both ways.
Yeah. So give yourself about 4 minutes per person. Would that be okay?
Yeah.
That's it.
So in our crazy lives, it's not often that someone, I mean, you know, we're therapists, we listen, but, and that's what, you know, part of what our training is to really take the time. But in our busy lives, it's not that usual for most people that someone says, hey, this really means something to me, and I'm giving it to you, and someone really is curious and interested in it, and takes their time trying to understand it, and then gives it back in a way that honors that. And that's something you can learn to do as a child or not, but it's something that gets missed as we get older. And so the reason we do this is because it can touch us as to what it's like to be a child and have someone say, oh, just put it over there, or, you know, I'm busy on the phone, or whatever that is. That's something that we need something, we want to share something that's important to us. And the response we get is, yeah. That's very real for a lot of people, yes.
And so this exercise is specific to the autonomy instruction?
Yeah.
And then if it's not a resource, like I feel like we had a resource experience, if it goes into collapse, then we would not want to share as much of ourselves.
Yes, well, that's part of it. I mean, what can happen, disruption can look like, is we lose a sense of that specialness to us. You know, it's like, well, you know, that doesn't matter, or I don't matter.
Yeah, got it.
That doesn't matter, it turns into I don't matter. Or if someone treats it in a way that feels like, I'll give a bad example because I can't think of a better one right now. But if you tell your parent this is important to me, and then they say, okay, if you're being bad, you can't play with that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so you learn, don't tell people those things. Because it can be used against you. So I don't want someone to know that. So you sort of pull away from the relationship to maintain your own autonomy.
And lose the connection.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And we want to talk a little bit about the trainings or a session or what?
Well, let's talk about our training now. It's contained and described in the sheets you have. I would say what we have done now is really change the teaching format, and we do 4 meetings and a total of 17 days. So the first one is 5 days, we teach the structure, and then 3 more or 4 days each. And people basically are getting these whole ideas down, and in that 17 days, everyone will have given and received 7 supervised demonstrations practice sessions. They will have watched us give 14 demonstration sessions, and we will have covered the 7 developmental stages, and everyone will have received a session at every stage. So we're not so much thinking now of people having a character structure, but more looking at what age level is represented by the issue they're working on. So then we use the information to work with the person or with those muscles from that developmental stage. And working with a muscle does 2 things as you're working on an issue. It both helps a person stay with the themes of that developmental stage, which recreates some of the history in the present, and it also will help them to build or release, we call it resources, but an ability that's needed for the resolution of the issue that they're working on. So it's very focused, and the fact that the use of the muscle helps them stay in the stage means we stay with an issue and the work is contained. It doesn't go to follow a process all over. It's contained enough so that you much more easily get a resolution and get a fuller resolution that leads to changes in the person's life, because they've also developed the ability that was missing, so they can now do something differently, and the different and better present behavior feels natural to them because they have that ability, and the old protective behavior is not needed as much and is not reached for as reflexively. So that's how the therapy works, and people get a sense of it, and
I'd like to talk about how they develop that.
yeah, just give me a second. Well, it's been fascinating for us that people start giving sessions to each other on the 3rd day of our training, and they give important sessions to each other. It's starting, and we had one of the founders attend one of our trainings because he wanted to see the new things we developed, and he received a session from someone on the 3rd day that was meaningful for him. So that impressed us.
So, and there's a structure to how we teach this. So the first thing we do is do some of the movements, the developmental movements. We have you maybe dance or move to music, or we ask you to do it in a particular way that uses those movements. We do a parent-child exercise where someone plays the role of the parent, someone plays the role of the child, and we have them dealing with that issue, that theme, and the parent, we always start with a positive, supporting, resourcing way of relating to that child. But then we do a number of examples of a misattunement and not supporting what that child developmentally needs. So you sense that emotionally and physically in your body. And we always end with a resource, so we do the parent-child exercise. We have people identify themselves as whether they think they're in the early resourced or late position. And people get into subgroups about that and start to, so the people who say that, they're underdeveloped in this developmental stage talk about how that shows up in their life. People who feel like they're rigid talk about how that shows up in their life. People who feel resourced talk about how that shows up in their life.
So you see other examples of what it looks like, and know things about the person as you hear them talk about it, and then hear about them working about it.
And then we give a mini lecture about the overall stage. We also get a lot of written material about it before you come. Yeah. And we practice using the muscles, finding out what that feels like. And then we do the demonstration sessions, and then you do practice sessions that are supervised.
Now,
For each
Also be a
stage.
good idea too, maybe for us to be getting together on our own.
Yes,
Yes, we
there's
encourage
a
study
we
groups
encourage
or-
study groups.
Yeah.
Or supervised study groups.
Yeah.
We encourage that.
And we have
You can
support
do
for
it
that.
through Skype, yeah.
But
And we teach about 5 muscles per stage. We teach what we think is most essential. I mean, there's many, many more muscles for each developmental period, but we teach 5. We always teach centering, we always teach grounding,
And support. We always
and
teach
support, we always teach
where
support.
on a person's body they can most receive the support that corresponds to the developmental stage, the issue you're working on.
And then we teach muscles that are actually really give the flavor and are pertinent to that stage.
Like the ones you taught today.
They're giving, receiving. So it's 17 days, so we do 2 stages each 4 or 5 day period. And then the last session, we do 1 stage and then we work with integrating it by going through all the centering muscles at one time and all the grounding muscles at one time. So you get a sense of what it's like to go through that, those ego functions, and see the subtlety of that. And that's very integrating.
Great.
Any questions?
I have some.
Yes?
Curious to know how big in general the groups kind of are, and do you guys have assistants? And just curious to know approximately how many people, like, do you guys have a limit in terms of like how big the group is?
20.
20, yeah. And then when you do exercises, do you have assistants supporting?
Yes.
Or, yeah.
Yes.
The other question I have is, you're talking about the muscles. Do you address the bones as well, or
Not
is
really
it-
the bones.
no, more muscle?
Yes, yeah. Because we really feel the psychological content is held in the muscle.
And fascia too sometimes.
Yeah.
It's not just muscles. 'Cause fascia wrapped around muscles, they act as containment, emotional containment.
Right.
So we'll work with fascia as well.
And we teach you a lot of resourcing skills, to work with your clients. Not just, from the developmental stages, but like what Jonathan is saying, containment, how to contain, how to slow things down, a lot of the things that really help people to be able to tolerate when they start to get activated, how to deal with that without being overwhelmed. Anything that we're missing that you can think of?
Would you be willing to go through those 7 stages again?
Yes. Existence. Do I have the right to exist? It's from the womb. And there's 3 outcomes. One is I'm happy to exist. I know I'm wanted. I'm welcome. One is very early disruption. It goes more into the mental existence. It's like a lot of energy in the head. I want to get away from my body. And the emotional existence, which is they did feel wanted, and then there was some rupture for some reason before they were born, or maybe right after birth, where the contact disappeared. So this person is a lot of energy in their body and is very anxious about abandonment and is constantly looking for the contact. Need structure is next. It's from birth to about 1.5 years. Talked about that earlier. You go into the collapse, which is more despairing. The later is more distrustful. Autonomy is next. Resource is really having a lot of curiosity and impulse and feeling okay following that. It's sort of this, the autonomy love affair with the world, just excited about everything. The early collapse is what we call
Non-verbal activity.
what?
Non-verbal activity.
Yeah, non-verbal activity changing. There's a loss of impulse, and if something gets uncomfortable for them, what they do is just go do something else. I just went into it just now. Then there's the late autonomy, where there's a verbal activity changing. What I was talking about before is they might feel manipulated by, if they show you what means something to them, so they're always one step ahead of you. They're always out there looking for following my impulse, but not wanting to get too close or too landed. They have problems with commitment. will structure can go into resource, really having my power, having my will, being able to like go forward and with strength without, not worrying about that someone's going to have a hard time with it. The collapse position there is something called self-sacrificing. It's really giving up, taking care of others, hoping that in doing that you'll get something back. The late stage is the more judging, blaming, a lot of power, a lot of containment that you can feel. It feels like they're got this pressure cooker inside of them. You don't want to push them too much because they'll, come out with their power and sort of with a lot more energy than the situation demands. Then the next one is love sexuality. That's a healthy integration of both your heart feelings and your sensual feelings. If there's a split, it can go into the early position, which is sort of coming out with your heart, but not really realizing that some of what you're doing is actually can feel a little sexy to people, but you're just sort of shy.
I can't resist to tell the story. I had a client once, a woman who said, I don't understand it. Guys are coming on to me all the time and I don't know what's going on. And I said, well, tell me what happened. She said, well, I was at this gym and the guy was exercising and I went over and said, you've got really nice muscles. And the next thing I knew.
But she was like, but sort of that coy kind of thing. And then the other disruption for that, the more later, is like the seductive, which is like one thing on the mind. Or as Tina Turner would say, what's love got to do? The next stage is the opinion structure. Healthy, you can express your opinions, you know what you think, you can come out with your opinions, but you're flexible enough that if new information comes in, you can change your opinion and integrate the new information. The early opinion is sort of like and you'll see a lot of young people who will like express their opinions while not expressing their opinions. You say, what do you think about this? Who cares? It's like that kind of rolling in the eyes. Now, they're not saying what they think, but they're thinking something. The late opinion structure has very strong opinions, and will get into they love to get into opinion arguments and fights, and they really enjoy this kind of contact, but they can't not do it, and they don't recognize how they alienate people when they get into these big fights with them all the time. And the last stage is solidarity performance. It's how you function in groups. It's can you show up and really be a leader when it's appropriate with the skills that you have to lead, and can you be a member and really encourage other people to come forward with their skills to make the group function better. That's resource. The early solidarity we call leveling, and it's like they don't really know what they do that well. They're afraid, to show up. And as a matter of fact, they don't want anybody else to show up. They want everybody to sort of be equal. And there are societies that really encourage that. Some of the native societies don't want somebody to be too big. And some of the Asian societies, they want, if you show up too much, it's a little shameful. And actually the Danish and the Scandinavian societies are very leveling society. They actually have socialized medicine. I know you in Canada do also, but it's even more so there. And the competitive position is very American. It's, I want to be the star, and I'm the best, and I don't care how it affects the group. I'm going to try and make all the baskets, even if my team loses. I'm going to look good. So it's that competitive thing, and there's some anxiety if I'm not in that position. I lose my value. So that's condensed.
Thanks.
Questions? Yes, please.
Each of these stages build on the others, so the lower ones are not there.
Not necessarily.
Independent. Is that?
They can have a little bit of influence, but not necessarily. So if your parents could really enjoy you, when you became independent, you might really have a lot of energy and be able to go out in the world and engage with the world, but you might, if they really didn't like your needs, you might not know anything about that. Another thing that can happen is that when kids have really bad parents that just are really missing the mark a lot of times, throughout the time till they get to school, they can be really undeveloped through all those stages. And then they get to school and the teachers recognize this kid is really smart, I really want to support them, they need a little, so they can get really skilled and be very healthy in both their opinion structure and their solidarity performance structure. You know, how to be a team member, how to be, but they're totally underdeveloped on this other side. And they don't, where it shows up is in relationships, where it shows up is in self-confidence, but they can function very well here even though all this is underdeveloped.
Yeah, I'd like to add on that, say that, like, for example, someone could be centered in their autonomy, but not centered in their willpower. Or someone could be grounded in their willpower, but not grounded in their autonomy, or not grounded in their love sexuality. So it will show up in slightly different ways. And so it's important to understand that you can feel centered in your power, you can feel centered in your autonomy, you can feel centered in your needs, grounded in that, but not in other areas too. So.
Right. So, and that's one of the things you didn't say was the using the right muscle to hold that conversation. You want to say anything about that? Okay. Well, there's a saying in, I think it's the right tool for the right task.
Mr.
Anyway, plumbers or whatever, if you have the right tool, you can do the task. It's sort of like if you use the right muscle, all of a sudden things work out much easier. So there's a precision to this work that if you know the developmental issue, you know the theme, you know what is it grounding, centering, is it interpersonal skills, whatever. You use the right muscle, you get that resource, all of a sudden everything just falls in place and is easier. But the other thing I want to say is that it's not so structured that all you're doing is following this, you do this and you do that. So once we know where we're landing, there's a theme that somebody's working on, we start to follow the process in that. And we don't really know where it's going to go at that point. So there's a process within the structure. It's just that when it's contained in the structure, you're much more apt to get to a resolution of that issue. Otherwise, it can start to wander, because people can go into their old ways of resourcing themselves, or the things that they feel more comfortable working on, and change the subject or move on to something else. And the thing they said they wanted to work on gets dropped. So that's, I think, what's particularly strong about our work is we know how to keep it where the person says they want to be. Any other questions?
Could you give us an example of just one muscle?
Well, we did. The pronator,
Okay.
supinate, be open to
Giving,
receive,
receiving.
pronate,
Yeah.
giving from your core. That's really about what happens at this developmental stage. I mean, as I was saying, it's like the kids at that age, they whatever they're doing is them. Whatever they're engaged in is them. So when they give you something, they're giving you a piece of themselves. And when you care about it, there's this sense of, I'm really being met. When you don't care about it, it's like the joy can disappear. And it's not like you've taken away their joy, but it feels like that to them. It's like it disappears. They can't hold on to it. So that...
Yeah, I can give you a few more examples. I mean, not in detail, but for autonomy is making space for yourself in the world. The muscle here, how we make space like this. Shrugging off burdens, a muscle back here. Reaching out is a muscle here. Taking in is a bicep. All of those things, have come into play at certain ages. Sometimes at certain parts of the muscle will come in at different ages and can be used specifically, as I say, they can keep the person centered in that stage. You can relate to them around that issue, so it keeps them centered there, and then so that it kind of contains the process. And as Ann said, we don't have an end point. It's not like we know where they're supposed to go to resolve an issue. They'll resolve it in their way, but they'll stay inside the relevant area to process it, and we follow them to that resolution. Other people's energy, if you have weak boundaries, other people's energy comes into you and it feels like you, when you're not sure, but you're very affected by what's going on around you without realizing it may not be coming from inside of you.
And that speaks to something that I was trying to articulate, so I don't know if it will come out as a question or just what I'm trying to figure out, but I'm thinking of, when the world has inundated someone, and we're asking them to do a specific exercise. I'm sort of trying to navigate, when do you not interrupt, and when are you leading and following, and if it's a boundary thing, then maybe that's what it is, and we're helping them work with boundaries. I'm just trying to figure out how we navigate asking someone to do something who hasn't been able to discover that impulse internally. Is this making any sense?
Not exactly.
Some of the road, I'll try one I said before. Suppose someone describing to me that, my husband asked me to do this, and he asked me to do that, and I can't do this, and I don't have time for that. And so I'm thinking she's probably not able to set limits.
Right.
So I'll, ask questions and stuff and find out more about it. And if that's what it is, I'll start to work with setting limits. Maybe just using the movement, maybe pushing against my resistance, maybe asking her to say some words or suggesting some words. And when I suggest something, I say, I'm going to suggest you try this,
Right.
but your words are much more important than mine. So anything that comes up spontaneously, I want you to try that. So we'll do that until, we're seeing whether your assumptions are right. And then it can produce, maybe get stronger, maybe get more specific to the situation.
And it's really also, while you're doing that, you're also always tracking what's happening between the two of us right now.
Yeah.
How are you feeling about doing this? How are you feeling about doing this with me? And you're noticing when it feels like that, this movement is easy, and when it gets a little shaky, what just happened? So you're following the process in the body to see what this causes, what happened right there. Because this is about really intimate boundary. This is a little less intimate. This is less. But then when you get to here and you really use this little muscle in your in your elbow, where that's a really strong hold of boundary. And a lot of people can't do that. They'll go like this and then just give up.
Right.
So what just happened?
One example I can think of, and during the training session, this is one we did around need character structure, which has to do with the ability to take in. And so I had a lot of despair in that, and I didn't know what my needs were. I didn't know how to take in. And so we worked with the movement where the therapist would hold out their hands like this. I would grab onto their hands and then slowly, and they would give a little bit of resistance, slowly bring their hands in. And I was making eye contact the whole time, and just noticing the sensation in my arms, noticing how it felt inside my body to do that. And then get to a point here where I actually bring my heart out to meet the hands that I'm pulling into my chest. I mean, that for me was a very powerful, it's like I didn't know that I could do that. And so, I mean, that's the thing about this work that's always surprised me the most is I didn't know that I didn't know. And now I'm learning something new that, oh wow, this is what it feels like to be like that. I could be like that. And so I've changed in ways that I couldn't even imagine that would have changed. And so that's what keeps me coming back to the work, is I keep discovering new ways of, oh, I can feel like this, or I can relate to people in this way. It was a big unknown for me. And so it's always challenging me in that way, and that's what I really like about it.
Good example, thank you.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
That's all right.
You came through.
Any other questions? Yes?
Or like a-
It's okay.
I have a question around, in a session, do you guys follow like a set of principles, and or do you have a sequence that you teach around that?
In the pages we gave out, let's see, turn, just a rough idea, you know,
On the last page?
first line of the last page. For many years, we said, like you said tonight, we contain the process. We don't just follow process wherever it goes. We contain it to the structure, to the issue. So after 20 years of saying we contain process, I made a little model of a container. And this is roughly, you know, the stages we go through in setting up a session. And then, you know, that sets it up. And, you know, most of the essential elements are there. And if you turn to the last page, this is what we have condensed the information from the encyclopedia. Okay, 500 something pages, I think, or is it more? 540 pages. We have now one page for each developmental stage. So this is the reference sheet. You know, when you recognize you're working with something from the autonomy structure, you probably want to use one of these muscles. The issues might be here, and here's some of the ways you can adapt to relate to them about their work and their progress. So,
Does that answer your question?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
so this is a way to, you know, as you're learning, you are repeating the process over and over, so you're getting a stronger idea of it. So it's not so much a formula, it's just something that helps you to learn, and then you take it in and you're doing it automatically.
So every model, every system has their own map. This is our map. It's based on the empirical research of childhood somatic and psychological development. But because we bring in the muscles, it's a little more precise than a lot of maps. But within that knowledge, we follow process. So we're following the process of what's happening in the relationship. We're following the process of what's happening in the person's body. We're following the process of what emotions are emerging and supporting that. So there's a lot of things you're tracking within the process, but you're trying to stay in that area.
I just wanted to add, without being rigid, we do have an idea of what healthy development for a stage looks like, or a childhood developmental stage. So we can get some ideas of when things are missing. Help a person develop those resources or skills to go through the problems that they have.
Any other question? Yes.
Once you kind of cultural something, does it seem to stay?
Once you what?
Like, once you kind of figured out something and then you follow through on something, does that stay?
It depends.
Do you have to practice something?
It's good to practice it at home. Sometimes it's like gotten. It's like, oh my God, and now I can do this, and it's there. Sometimes you need a follow-up session or two. Sometimes you need to practice the movement you know, imagine different situations you're going to be in it. But sometimes it's just that, got it. So it varies.
The character structures, is this just part of this, or have they originated somewhere else and then you brought in and morphed? Are they, where are they from?
They're a combination of looking at Freud,
You know,
Erickson,
right?
Reich,
Lowen.
Lowen,
Bioenergetics.
you know, bioenergetics, their own development. They included, what's her name? Woman who, Scandinavian woman who started to develop working with hypotonic, with the underdeveloped muscles. They also follow the research of Frank Lake, who was who first recognized that in the existence level there can be two different kinds of splits: the mental and the emotional. And then the Danes recognized, well, that can happen at any developmental stage. You can have resourced, or you can have one that looks more undeveloped and one that's more rigid. And Greta Holla was a somatic development specialist from Denmark who really, they looked at her work. And so what development looked like in children when it was resourced, what muscles, what movements were there, and when it was not developed, what it looked like. And the idea of going back to the stage of development prior to where you lost it, working with that resource and then going to the place where you don't have it and working with those movements. And they also integrated Piaget's cognitive development. They've updated it more to the neuropsychology. And there's another piece of work they integrated that was Vyatsky, who's a Russian educational, philosophical writer from the 30s or 40s. Oh, and also, what's his name? The guy who did the research with animals, Conrad Lorenz, about, yeah. So there's a lot of different theories that they used as the ground for, that they integrated into their work. Is that too much? Okay.
Well, because character structures also used to be in Napoleon then.
It is. It's different.
Yeah, it was in the Institute, I think, so works with character instructions. And then Roberts decided to abandon the whole idea, so I'm just curious.
Oh, well, it's interesting. One of the people who's in our training right now is one of the Hakomi trainers, and has suggested to them that they could really learn something from us that would be very useful to them, not to change their work, but to add to it, because we have something they don't have, and he feels he's really been able to learn something about himself through this.
Is he from the Institute?
Huh?
Is he from the Hakomi Institute?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, there's Terrence.
There's different schools.
Yeah, there's two of them.
So I'm just curious.
We have two. So.
Yeah.
We have two instructors from Komi in our training.
So, any other?
A lot of information on our website, and Jonathan has a website that's also linked to ours. He's written up in detail some of the Bodynamic stuff. You can get a lot more from that. And feel free to contact me or Jonathan with any questions. We've really, really enjoyed working with the group that's finishing now or finished.
Canadians are really cool people. No, I really.
We hope to come
So,
back.
it's been a pleasure to be here and I love Vancouver, but I think Canadians are a special group of people. It's really very nice.
It's funny, we focus very much on the teaching, but because you get sessions probably from us as a demonstration and the practice session, there's a lot of growth and change and a lot of support in the group. So people have grown a lot in that.
It's very noticeable.
Without our focus on their growth.